Welcome to Pen and Perspective, where the story always knows more than it's telling. Every word is intentional, every silence holds a truth. Let's get into it. I didn't break the system, I learned it. People think success is loud. It isn't. The loud ones flame out early. The ones who last learn how to move without making noise. I didn't wake up one day with power. I accumulated it over 5 years. Every step small enough to justify. Every win clean enough to explain. Most damage doesn't start with malice. It starts with math. When I first got into this space, I wasn't trying to be ruthless. I was trying to be competitive. There's a very real difference. Ruthlessness is personal. Competition is structural. If you don't understand the system you're in, it eats you alive. And I understood it early. Budgets aren't moral documents, they're narratives. Whoever controls the story controls the flow. My job was to grow numbers, revenue, participation, impact metrics, all the things people like to point to when they want to justify expansion. And I did exactly what I was hired to do. The first year, it was clean, conservative, no shortcuts. I learned the rhythm, learned who rubber stamped reports without reading them, learned which oversight committees cared about optics more than accuracy, learned how often the word community could be used without anyone ever defining it. By year 2, I realized something important. No one was auditing intent, only outcomes. So I started focusing on outcomes. Small reallocations at first, timing adjustments, strategic approvals, nothing illegal, nothing reckless, just efficient. When something worked, I did it again. When it didn't raise alarms, I scaled it. That's how this always happens. Not with one big leap, with a series of decisions that all make sense on their own. By year 3, I wasn't chasing opportunity anymore. Opportunity was coming to me. I was being invited into rooms where people spoke candidly about what they needed and what they were willing to overlook to get it. And that's when I learned the difference between policy and practice. Policy says one thing, practice tells the truth. By then, I also understood you didn't need to own people to benefit from them. You just need to recognize what they're willing to trade and make it worth their while. Which is why I paid attention to my staff. Most people in corporate environments are either invisible or obvious. The invisible ones do the work, the obvious ones do the talking. Every once in a while, someone shows up who understands both. I learned early that the people who win aren't always the loudest or the smartest. They're the ones who understand leverage, who see where influence flows and learn how to stand just upstream from it. By the time I became CEO, the machine was already humming. Private flights twice a month, first class the rest of the time. Dinners where the wine list mattered more than the menu. Deals closed in hotel lounges and quiet offices where the blinds stayed half drawn. People think wealth announces itself. Real money whispers. Every year I learned a little more about how the system bends when you apply pressure in the right places. A zoning approval expedited here. A partnership fast-tracked there. A community initiative framed just well enough to unlock funding nobody asked too many questions about. Everything looked clean on paper. That was the point. I wasn't stealing. I wasn't shaking anyone down. I was optimizing, leveraging relationships, creating outcomes. The board loved the growth curve. Investors loved the narrative. And every time the numbers landed exactly where I said they would, it reinforced the same truth. I knew what I was doing. The hidden figure had been in my orbit long before the title, long before the office. We moved in parallel lanes, not friends, not enemies, mutually beneficial. That kind of relationship sharpens you. I didn't like how he moved. I respected that he got results. That respect always came with a quiet edge of fear. So I kept my distance, played my side clean enough, took just enough to justify the risk. The end goal was always the same, build fast and big and eventually untangle myself. I didn't want to be tethered to him forever. Money first, independence later. And for a long time, it worked. Every deal closed clean, every quarter stronger than the last, every small step landing exactly where it was supposed to. Success has a way of making you bold, and boldness makes you forget that every system, no matter how well learned, eventually notices who's using it. I never mistook the hidden figure for safe. I'd seen firsthand how quickly people became expendable when they stopped being useful. This whole thing, the growth, the scaling, the aggressive optimization, it wasn't just about money. It was about independence, about building enough distance that I could choose my own partners. That was the real goal. The partnership meeting wasn't supposed to go our way. I knew that before I walked in. Mid-sized logistics firm, family-owned, conservative board. They'd already turned down 2 offers from competitors with deeper pockets than us. On paper, there was no reason for them to say yes, which is exactly why I took the meeting myself. Their CEO did most of the talking. Numbers, risk, stability, legacy language, the kind men use when they want to sound principled instead of afraid. I let him finish. Then I leaned back and told him the truth. I told him where his industry was heading in 5 years. I told him which of his competitors would fold first. I told him why his grandchildren wouldn't care about loyalty the way he did. I framed inevitability. I slid the revised terms across the table. Not sweeter, just smarter. Faster payouts, shared branding. A clause that let him keep his name on the building while our infrastructure did the heavy lifting. You don't lose control, I said. You just stop bleeding time. There was a pause, the kind where you can feel people recalculating who you are. One board member asked a question that wasn't really a question. Another nodded without realizing it. The CEO stared at the page longer than he needed to. Then he smiled. We shook hands 15 minutes later. When I walked out, my phone was already buzzing, my team realizing the deal was done before I told them. Stock projections updated. Investor confidence ticked up. A 7-figure revenue boost that would roll cleanly into the next quarter. I didn't feel excited. I felt confirmed. Every win like that made me bolder, made me trust my instincts more, made me believe that whatever risks I was taking elsewhere were calculated, manageable, worth it. Because when you keep winning like that, it starts to feel like the rules don't apply to you anymore. And that belief, that's the most dangerous asset a man can have. Update 1. Taylor was the right choice. I didn't need anyone to explain Taylor to me. People think recognition happens in meetings, in resumes, in recommendations passed across conference tables like favors. That's not how it works at this level. You don't notice people because someone introduces them. You notice patterns first, then you find the person sitting at the center of them. That's how I knew about her. Before her name ever came up, I was already watching the numbers. Community-facing programs don't usually outperform private sector initiatives. They're slower, heavier, too many hands involved, too many approvals, too many people who don't understand how to move money without tripping alarms. So when those numbers started landing clean, quarter after quarter, I paid attention. Same departments, same zip codes, same outcomes, no public friction, no internal complaints. That doesn't happen by accident. The hidden figure didn't sell her to me. He confirmed what I already knew. He didn't say, "You have a rising star." He said, 40% of your accelerated outcomes pass through the same operational hands. He said, no noise, no flags. He said, she understands where the friction lives. I started to put the pieces together. And then I didn't need to have a meeting with Taylor to know she was the one playing the game. I simply made sure the incentives traveled downhill. Quiet bonuses, discretionary approvals, subtle praise routed through middle management, nothing that could be traced back to me directly. Just enough reinforcement to let her know she was seen. That's how systems self-select. Maya noticed. Of course she did. She didn't confront it, didn't complain. She grew quieter, observant. People like that don't explode, they remember. But at the time, I wasn't worried. Taylor was producing. The numbers were gliding. Community-facing initiatives were clearing faster. Partners were satisfied. My board reports read like momentum, and momentum has a way of dulling caution. Maya had the tenure, the relationships, the reputation. On paper, the promotion should have been hers, but paper doesn't tell the whole story. Paper doesn't measure velocity. It doesn't measure appetite. It doesn't measure how far someone is willing to go once they realized the doors unlocked. Taylor didn't push Maya out loudly. She didn't humiliate her. She didn't leave fingerprints. She just moved faster, cleaner, more decisively. And when the decision landed, it looked justified enough to survive scrutiny. I liked that, not because it was cruel, because it was familiar. I didn't interfere with the promotion process between Taylor and Maya. That's important to say, even to myself. The decision passed through the proper channels, but I was paying attention. Maya had been steady for years, reliable, thorough, the kind of employee leadership leans on without ever rewarding. I respected her competence, but competence alone doesn't move institutions forward. It maintains them. Taylor understood something Maya didn't. When she polished that report, she didn't steal credit. She translated value into language leadership responds to. She added narrative where there was only accuracy, projection where there was only completion. That footnote mattered because it spoke my language. That's how I came up too. Not by breaking the system, by learning it, by understanding which rules were enforced and which ones were ornamental. Every step I took early on was small, barely noticeable, but every step landed. And once you realize the ground holds you, you stop hesitating. Taylor had already figured that part out. The small businesses were where she proved her value beyond doubt. The barbershop, the laundromat, two other operations that technically shouldn't have moved as fast as they did. Paperwork cleared quicker. Approvals landed smoother. Funding flowed without delays that usually slow those kinds of initiatives down. Every time one of those deals closed clean, I authorized bonuses, quiet ones, discretionary, enough to reinforce behavior without creating dependency. She didn't ask questions. She didn't get sloppy. She understood the exchange. Each win made the next step easier to justify. That's how escalation happens. Not in leaps, in confirmations. Then Taylor disappeared. Now it's important to note when Taylor disappeared, the system didn't collapse. I say that because people love to overstate their indispensability. The truth is, most systems can limp without their key players for a while. Mine did. The numbers still moved, reports still landed, initiatives still cleared, but the glide was gone. Everything felt heavier. Approvals took longer. Justifications got wordier. Departments that usually stayed quiet started asking questions they didn't need answered. Nothing accusatory. Nothing that required escalation, just curiosity, the kind that grows legs if you don't step on it early. I knew I'd have to intervene. HR flagged inconsistencies, fluctuations that didn't match previous quarters, timelines that felt off, performance that was still strong but no longer seamless. I reframed it as transition lag, capacity strain, normal disruption when a high output contributor is suddenly unavailable. All of it was true enough to pass. I didn't shut anything down or silence anyone. I adjusted expectations, shifted benchmarks, and bought time. That's what leadership looks like at this level. When Taylor returned, things corrected themselves almost immediately. The same departments that had questions went quiet again. The numbers settled back into their familiar rhythm. The friction eased. That told me what I needed to know. Not that she was exceptional, I already knew that, but that she was structural. She didn't just produce outcomes. She stabilized the pathways that led to them. That kind of influence doesn't come from position. It comes from understanding where pressure builds and where release is allowed. We spoke briefly. She didn't need a speech. I didn't need to offer one. We both understood the unspoken agreement. Things would return to schedule, and the way forward would require more discretion than before. Because once a system gets observed, even casually, it doesn't forget that feeling. I left that conversation confident, not relieved, not sentimental. Confident that the structure still held. Confident that the machine was running again. Confident that whatever adjustments needed to be made next, I'd make them, the same way I always had. So I went back to work, back to closing deals, back to thinking 3 quarters ahead, certain that whatever tension had brushed past us had moved on. And then I didn't know yet that the story had already been told. I just hadn't heard it out loud. Update 2. It didn't come through the board. That's the first thing people always assume. That exposure arrives with formality, with warnings, with preparation. It didn't. It came through a link. then a text from someone I hadn't spoken to in years that just said, "Have you seen this?" By the time I opened it, the video was already moving. Not viral yet, but catching. The kind of traction you recognize when a story is being received, not just watched. The page loaded. A woman I didn't know. Her name sat under the video. Kendall. No credentials shouted. No dramatics. Her voice was calm, measured, almost polite. That's what made me stay. She didn't accuse anyone directly. She laid out timelines instead. Growth curves, funding patterns, community-facing initiatives that looked generous on the surface and strategic underneath. She talked about a community organizer, front-facing, well-liked, polished. Someone who moved easily through rooms because people trusted her. She never said Taylor's name, and she didn't have to. My stomach didn't drop when I realized who she meant. My mind did the math, because the comments were already doing it too. People don't need confirmation. They need alignment. And the alignment was happening in real time. Whoever approved this knew what they were doing. Follow the incentives. This isn't grassroots. This is leverage. I watched the rest of the video without blinking. Every slide narrowed the perimeter. Every sentence that said, "We're not naming names," pointed harder than an accusation ever could. I closed the app, opened my email. Nothing. That was worse. Because when an organization believes something is baseless, denial is immediate, fast, loud. Silence means conversations are happening somewhere I'm not. I thought about calling Taylor. Didn't. There was no version of that conversation that helped either of us. And I already knew what HR was going to do. They wouldn't investigate her. They would separate her with language that sounded like concern. I knew because I'd helped design those exits before. An hour later, my phone buzzed again. Not a tag, a calendar invite. Leadership sync, mandatory 10 p.m. No agenda. That was new. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled. Once a story goes public, it doesn't belong to the people inside it anymore. And whatever control I thought I had, whatever insulation I believed in, was officially being tested. That gave me just under 2 hours to understand how alone I was. I opened my contacts already knowing who I was calling. The hidden figure rang twice before going to voicemail. I didn't leave one, and I tried again 10 minutes later, then once more, nothing. That's when the text came through. "This is what you signed up for. You'll figure it out." Distance. That was the first real tell. I sat there longer than I meant to, staring at the message like it might rearrange itself into something useful. It didn't. So I did what I've always done when things feel unstable. I gathered information. I reached out to 2 people who owed me favors. One didn't answer. The other sent a vague, "still looking into it." That meant absolutely nothing. By 9:30, it was clear. I was walking into that board meeting blind. Just me and whatever story they'd already decided on. That's where we'll leave it for now. In part 2, shit hits the fan. You've been listening to Pen and Perspective. If it sat in your spirit, let it linger. If it stirred something in you, don't ignore it. I'm Miana DK, and before I put my pen down, tell me, whose perspective should I sit with next?